Good morning. So as I said, it's Tu B'Shvat. It's the first Yohrtzeit of our Chaver, Mordechai Yochanan ben Yehuda David, and his family has generously sponsored today's Shiur. So I did want to share. Gadi, did you know Mordechai Jacoby?
No, I didn't have the honor to.
Okay, yes, I wanted to share a few words because he was a really great man. He was a really inspirational figure. And he was a big part of our kollel. He used to sit right next to me in the Beis Midrash for many years. I mean, he passed away last year, and at the very end, he wasn't able to leave the house. But until then, he came every day and he walked. He lived on Rehov Ruben. They still have a house there. And he, he would walk down every day when he could hardly walk at the very end. I mean, he lived into his mid-90s.
Excuse me, he also came to the 6 o'clock Shiur here in the Knesset.
Yes, he was a masmid. He was always going to shul and learning. He loved Torah and he loved Avodas Hashem. He had been the Gabbai in Cleveland. He was a Clevelander. He came from Slovakia.
They announced last night that the library that we have in the shul, that was donated by his family.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's really, really nice. He has 5 wonderful children and a lot of grandchildren, and they're working now on great-grandchildren. His son is a syndicated columnist, Jeff Jacoby. He's always interesting to read. His other son is also Mitch, writes, I think, about chemistry. And he has 3 daughters, one in Israel, one still in Cleveland, Sharon Mushkin. And again, she led the donation in this one. And his daughter, who's now in California. And he had a chavrusa with her in the last year of his life. So Mordechai was a Holocaust survivor. He was born in Slovakia, I think in 1929 or something, a long, long time ago. And it was sort of 1,000 years ago because life in Slovakia, I grew up, there was a country called Czechoslovakia. But today it's the Czech Republic and Slovakia. And there's a whole balagan of what's going on over there. I can't explain it to you. I don't know. But Mordechai explained to me that the Czech Republic is sort of advanced, sort of, almost Western, it's Central Europe, but more advanced and cultured. And, I'll say Skoda. Skoda, I think, is a great car. And I think it's, it's Czech technology. Whereas Slovakia is really backward and really primitive. And, I spent a year of my life in Russia, and I was mostly in Moscow, but I traveled a little bit to Kiev, Petersburg, and a little bit out into the country. And you see that still to this very day in Eastern Europe, outside the big cities, in the rural areas, life is very primitive. They hardly have running water and electricity because the economies in a lot of these countries, they were dominated by communists for decades, and they're really backward. The people are very pashut, and their life it's essentially feudal. It goes back 1,000 years. And so Mordechai, he grew up like on a farm, in a farm village. There was, not even 1 million of Jews. And he went to his grandparents at an early age where he could get a little bit of education. But he told me that he had very little formal education because in the mid-30s, life already became a balagan with the war. And the country he was in, although it was Slovakia, but then the Hungarians took over and then ultimately the Germans. And so his education was disrupted by the war. And he was like made of steel. He was a really tough guy. And he had a wonderful, soft and giving heart, but he was a really tough guy and just could go with the flow and nothing could really faze him. And so I think he was in actually 5 different camps. And he came to Cleveland. He had a sister who got out before the war. She was really lucky. And she had wanted to be in America from very early on. So he came to his sister in Cleveland and made a life for himself. He married a wonderful American woman, Arlene, and they had a wonderful marriage for like 60 years. And as I said, 5 wonderful children. So Mordechai was a gibor, and he knew a lot of Torah. He was like a Talmid Chacham. And I asked him, did you learn that in the old country? And he said, no, he hardly learned anything there because it was primitive and then it was war. And so he learned, I knew where he went to shul. Again, I'm a Clevelander also. And so Rabbi Garfunkel was Rav of the Shtibel in Cleveland. He just passed away a week or 2 ago. He was an important figure, I think, for Mordechai. but also Rabbi Bernstein, soll sein gesund in the Young Israel of Cleveland. Mordechai was a gabbai there for many years. And so he did a lot of learning. He got up early in the morning to learn and daven, and he more or less learned all day, where he would go to different shiurim, and he was part of our koilel. And so he was really tough and always just moving forward to do the right thing and to help other people. He had a furniture business. He told me that I think the wholesale furniture business is a good business. The retail business is a bad business. And he had it in a tough neighborhood. I'll tell you another story that he told me. Jeff went to college in Boston. Jeff lives now in Boston, works for the Boston Globe. Cleveland to Boston is a very long trip. And, if you're Shomer Shabbos, and he was a store owner, Mordechai had to run the store, and he had to be in the store because he didn't have a lot of help or people that he could rely on. So when is he going to take his kid to college? So they set out, I think, Motzei Shabbos, and they drove and drove and drove and drove. And they get there to Boston, they unpack, his son's stuff, everything he needs for college, and he gets back in the car and drives home because he wants to open the store Monday morning. And he said he was so exhausted that he had to stop at the side of the road and take a snooze for 15 minutes and then drive for a couple more hours. So he was a trooper, he was a soldier. He was he always did what you needed to do. He was a really wonderful person. So I actually have a particular halacha that Mordechai loved this halacha. It's a sophisticated one. It has to do with taking truma on oranges. He had in Israel on Reuven, they had, I think it was maybe clementinas. He had 1 million clementinas, and he would eat them in the morning. He would come to Koilo, you could smell them on his fingers still. And he would bring a whole plastic bag of them. He would bring it to me and to other people. And he would explain how he had taken the Trumas and Maasros. So I'm going to teach it today because it's not a well-known halacha. It's as I said, it's nuanced and tricky. So we're going to go through that. But I actually wanted to start with something from the parsha. I heard it this morning in shul, and it spoke to me. And that is the words Vichad Yisro. Mordechai had been a Bal Koire in Cleveland, and he knew the Chumash really, really well. He knew what's in which parsha everywhere. So we read this morning, Vayichad Yisroi al kol hatoiva asher aso Adonai liyisrael asher hitzilo miyad Mitzrayim. So it's sort of a weird and unique word, this word Vayichad. The English here translates, and Jethro rejoiced, okay? He rejoiced over all the kindness that the Lord had shown Israel when he delivered them from the Egyptians. So Rashi says, Vayichad Yisro, V'yismach Yisro. Okay, the simplest meaning I do think is there's a Hebrew word chedva, which is a form of joy. And so that's the simple meaning. Vayichad Yisro, he rejoiced over all the goodness, all the good things that God did for the Jewish people in saving them from the Egyptians. So Rashi himself says, Zeu pshuto. Umidrash Agada, Nase Besaro Chidudin Chidudin. When Yisro heard all the things that Hashem did for Klal Yisrael in saving them from the Egyptians, and I think also in punishing the Egyptians, so Yisro's, I'm going to say his skin crawled. He got goosebumps. Okay, Nase Besaro Chidudin Chidudin. Chidud in this meaning might mean sharp or prickly. How about that? His skin became prickly. Meitzar al ibud Mitzrayim. He had a sense of loss for what had happened to the Egyptians. Again, we have to understand, think of this from Yisro's perspective. Yisro is a chief Midianite. He is sort of, let's say, tribally related to the Egyptians, to the Jewish people. He's a father-in-law of Moshe Rabbeinu. He's a paradigm of a Ger Tzedek. He's a convert entering the Jewish people. But his feelings, therefore, about the punishment that the non-Jews, that the Egyptian civilization and people, that they suffered, it aroused in him what I'm going to call today ambivalent feelings. And I want to talk today about ambivalent feelings. So Rashi's explaining it, that although the simple meaning of the text, V'yichad Yisro, is that V'yismach Yisro, but the Midrash Agada is Naseh B'saro Chidudin Chidudin, Meitzar, he's suffering a certain amount of tsar about the loss of the Egyptians. Hainu de Amri Inshi, there's a folk expression, Giyure ada Sara Dori, lo tivaze arama be'apei. When you're in the presence of a convert, even 10 generations later, from a family of converts, don't say something unseemly or not nice about non-Jews in front of him. Another thing that comes to my mind in this is Obama, President Obama. He's mixed racial, right? His mother was a white lady from Middle America, and his father was a Black African. And he said, sometimes I'd be with my mother's family and they'd say things about Black people and it would make my skin crawl because I couldn't believe how racist they were. And again, racism is a hard thing to totally get rid of. And just it has to do with xenophobia, our fears of people who are different than us. And so you just behave differently when you're in a homogenous crowd. You're with people who are all Jewish or something, or you're in a mixed crowd, you're more careful with what you say. And so someone who's of mixed origin, a person like Yisro or like Barack Obama, whatever, they're sensitive. And so as a Jew, we have an Isser called Oinos Dvarim, not to offend people, not to be obnoxious, not to hurt their feelings. And so it's something we need to be aware of, that, who is in the room when I say what I say, because again, to say something nasty or racist or disgusting is always usher. You can't be like that. But to say something that in a group of Jews, who are like-minded and so forth, it might be okay. But if you're in a mixed crowd of people who might have sensitivities to those issues, like the Gemara is saying here, Giyura ada saradari lo tivazi arma bi'apei, if you're in a group and there might be people who are sensitive to it, then you have to be really careful not to hurt their feelings. That's an Issur D'Oraisa called Oinos Dvarim. So that was the first thing in Vichad Yisro, that he has these mixed feelings about what's happened here, that Hashem has done to the Jews, to help the Jews, but to hurt the Egyptians. And Yisro is ambivalent about it. Before I go further on the ambivalence, I want to share an insight into this word Vayichad as joy. And that is the following. You recall that when Hashem told Avram Avinu that he's going to have a child with Sarah, Vayipol Avram al Pana Vayitzchak, Vayomer Belibo Halaven Mea Shana Yivaled Bim Sarah Habastishim Shana Teled. Abraham threw himself on his face and laughed as he said to himself, can a child be born to a man 100 years old, or can Sarah bear a child at 90? So this Rashi said, no, it's the Targum. The Targum says, Unefal Avram alapoi v'chadi. Okay, the Targum Unklis, the Aramaic translation of this word by Yitzchak, which seems that he laughed. I mean, the English says he laughed. And we know later Sarah laughs and she gets in trouble. Hashem says, why did Sarah laugh? And Sarah says, I didn't laugh. And Hashem says, yes, you did. So that's a famous question of sort of the difference between Abraham's laugh and Sarah's laugh. And I wanted to show you here, based on this word, Vayichad or Vechadi, the distinction in, let's say, maybe how Abraham laughed versus how Sarah laughed. I think there is a distinction. That's what I think is at the root of the distinction here. That when Abraham, it says he fell on his face. So it was a really big deal that he's going to have a child with his wife. They've been married decades and never had children. And she is 90. But yes, she's going to have a child. V'chadi. Okay. V'chadi is that Lashon Simcha. Chedva. He rejoiced. And he said, B'libei halavar mea shnin yevlad v'im Sarah habat tish'in shnin talid. So there is, he's sort of incredulous, but there's a deep joy. There's a chadi. What Yisro felt, the joy at the salvation of the Jewish people. I wanted to show you what it's the Targum on Vatitzchak Sarah. Because again, in the Hebrew, Avram is Yitzchak and Sarah is Vatitzchak. So it's the same word, same root, just, the male and the female form. Vatitzchak Sarah b'kirba lemor achrei veloisi hoisali edna ve'adoini zaken. Sarah laughed to herself, saying, Now that I'm withered, am I to have enjoyment? Enjoyment. With my husband so old. Okay, I don't like the translation, but it doesn't matter. We're focused on this word v'titzchak. So what is the Targum Onkelos on v'titzchak of Sarah? On Avram it was v'chadi, it was, chedva. But on Sarah, it's v'chaychas. V'chaychas Sarah, b'me'ah. L'meimar basar de sevis, havali ulemu, v'riboni siv. We recognize this word from another Hebrew word, the word chiyuch. Okay, a smile in Hebrew is a chiyuch. So she smiled. There's a word in Hebrew, gichuch, which is to laugh. And so I think it's related to this word, the gichuch and the chayches and so forth. And so my point here is that Hashem is telling something, certainly miraculous and very, very shocking, surprising. It's wonderful. But there is a distinction in the response of Abraham and Sarah. Abraham is vayitzchak v'chadi. He rejoices in his heart. And the Sarah, v'titzchak Sarah, she's v'chayches. She smiles sort of not incredulously, but like unbelievingly, like almost scoffing. Like, how could this be? How is my body, right? They mentioned me'eha, bikirba, which could be to herself. That's what the English translate. But Chazal look at it as she's looking at her own body, and she's looking like, this is a woman, maybe she didn't have a womb, or maybe later she developed a womb, but she never, ever, of course, has had any children. And now she's 90 years old. So she's looking, a 90-year-old woman looking at her own body and smiling, scoffingly, this is never going to happen, okay? And my husband's also old, he's 100. So my point here was just to share this insight into this word Vichad, that Vichad Yisro is V'yismach, Lashon V'chadi, V'chedva, and that's what Avram felt when he was told about this child, Yitzchak, that's going to be born to him. Whereas Sarah's response was V'chayches. It wasn't V'chadi, it was a different word, that it was a certain type of laughing smile that includes a bit of mockery or scoffing, and that's why she was taken to task. So that's what I think about that. I'm going on because I do want to share a psychological insight. And this doesn't have anything to do with Mordechai. Mordechai's psychology, I think, was remarkably simple and sort of surprisingly simple for a person who had been through so much. He didn't seem, I guess he talked a little bit about it sometimes, the survivor's guilt and stuff like that, but he was remarkably, unfettered by it, and really a healthy psychology, and just a wonderful person, just doing what you're supposed to do at all times. But I myself am more complicated than that. And so I wanted to share an insight into Yisro here, who is, Rashi said, he's happy, but his skin is crawling. His skin is prickly. So how could that be? How could one person feel two things at the same time? And of course, the answer is because he's human, and human beings can have conflicted emotions. And I think it's important to talk about, in terms of mitzvahs, v'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha, and many, many mitzvahs that deal with interpersonal relationships, to realize that people are complicated. Nebuch, the parsha we've had recently with the Russia, who was a famous author, and he seemed to be really empathetic and wonderful, and actually he was a monster of abuse. And so I've said already that, people talk about throwing out his books, etc. And I think what I want to share here about ambivalence is realizing that people are not, monochromatic. They're not a single color. They're complicated, and there's good and evil inside of everybody. But this is about your feelings, that your feelings can be both positive and negative, love and hate for the same person, okay? And again, I think Yisro is struggling with that he's really happy that the Jews have been saved, but he's hurting and uncomfortable with the suffering of the Egyptians. So again, this person is not, Iskra Fileva, PhD, whatever, she has learned something, but I like, again, it's a springboard for insight into the human psyche for me. She says, when I was in primary school, I saw a few words scribbled on a desk in an older student's handwriting. I love you and I hate you. The sentence impressed me greatly. It had never occurred to me previously one could love and hate somebody at the same time. I had not yet been introduced to the idea of emotional ambivalence. I now think it likely that part of the reason the words written in ink on the desk in the classroom made such an impression on me was that I had already experienced emotional ambivalence. I just didn't know what that was that I felt. The sentence at once illuminated parts of my own emotional life and informed me that I was not alone or different. Other people, as evidenced by the author of the sentence, could feel that way too. Comes Lionel. I already knew at the time that people, small children especially, might make conflicting statements about their feeling for someone. A child upset that he or she's not getting his or her way might say to a parent or a sibling, I hate you. However, I think I grasp intuitively that such statements are often hollow and inauthentic, an expression of powerlessness or frustration. When we're very young, we don't have many ways of securing for ourselves the things we want, and we don't have the power to make other people give us those things either. We somehow learn that we might get our way if we persuade others that our love for them is conditional, and it depends on whether they do as we like. If they don't, we say we hate them, hoping to inflict enough pain for them to change their minds. I see my kids or my grandkids do that. They say, you know, I won't be your friend, you know, if you don't give me shoko or whatever. They try to manipulate something by saying, I'll hate you or I won't love you anymore. So that's, you know, a trick that kids use. We all, however, including children, may experience true emotional ambivalence. Okay, and this is really what I want to share. And she quotes Freud here. Okay, so now Freud was a genius and, you know, wonderful Jewish psychologist, a pioneer in his field. He opened the field really. He had started as a medical doctor. And now some of his ideas in psychology, he went too far. He was really sensitive to psychological tensions, but some of his stuff, like, you know, it's just not so. But he had a big thing, right, called the Oedipus complex, about how sons love their mothers, right, and girls love their fathers, and he exaggerated it. But he says here, he went so far as to suggest that all children are deeply ambivalent towards a same-sex parent, meaning every son loves his father, but also hates his father because his father has his mother's love and he wants his mother's love. So again, there's an insight there on the one hand, that a child loves his mother, you know, in the sense it's his first love interest as a 3-year-old or whatever, but that he hates his father because, you know, his father is the spouse of his mother, whatever. There's a tiny bit of truth to it, but it's overstated. Anyway, Freud said that ambivalence is like a part of the human condition growing up in a regular family. We may have positive and negative feelings for the same object at the same time. And for me, that's the Iker Chiddush, that in math, it's either 1 or 2. It's not 1 and 2. So I either love or I hate regarding a specific object. But I think human psychology is really not like that. And I think we may both love and hate at the same time. I think that is true. What I would like to do here is to discuss the phenomena more detail, focusing on ambivalent attitude towards people. Why do we ever feel ambivalent? So she says sometimes people's characters are complex. We like someone's sense of humor, but not her unreliability. Or we appreciate a person's courage, but think he lacks compassion. At other times, however, the source of ambivalence is different. It has to do not so much with the other's character, but the other's relationship with us specifically. Thus, you may love an uncle, but have the feeling he has a tendency to compare you to his own son. You find that off-putting. Or you love your sister, but think she's too flirty with your spouse, or else is trying to steal your friends. Emotional ambivalence is often painful, especially ambivalence of the second sort, having to do with your particular relationship with the other, not with the other's character. The Roman poet Catullus, who may have been the first author to document the state that interests me here, noted this pain. In a poem for his lover, whom he called Lesbia, likely not her real name, Catullus wrote, I hate and I love. Why I do this, perhaps you ask, I know not, but I feel it happening and I am tortured. So to me, that's brilliant. that I've been through some of that, where you love and you hate, and you don't want to feel that way, but you do feel that way, and you're sort of just tortured. An ambivalent relationship with a loved one may be more painful than a plainly bad one. A bad relationship is like cold weather. We know how to prepare for, we may either go out or not go out at all, cut contact, or else go prepared, dress appropriately, activate defense mechanisms. But an ambivalent one is a bit like weather that changes on you. You cannot possibly know what to do or what to wear. Just as you relax, ready to take in the warmth, a cold wave engulfs you. For some, emotional ambivalence is so painful that they don't like it even in art and opt for fiction that does not require holding contradictory attitudes toward the same fictional character. Sometimes movie directors purposely set out to create emotionally complex fiction, but they don't go all the way. Okay, I'm going to skip her particular movie. Emotional ambivalence may be difficult to recognize in ourselves. It is an attitude that does not entirely make sense. Do we love this person or not? We're not sure. We may reach different conclusions on different occasions. When other people are ambivalent towards us, we may fail to acknowledge that too. Perhaps we think that only those who have pure, unadulterated love for us have any love at all. When we detect any hostility, hatred, or envy on the part of the other, we may conclude that expressions of love and friendship are inauthentic and untrue. Or we may try to explain away the negativity and persuade ourselves that we are imagining it. Yet we know from our own case that there are ambivalent attitudes that involve both love for and hatred of another. If we can have such attitude towards others, it follows that they can have them towards us, unless we suppose our own psychology is radically different from that of other people. What should we do about emotional ambivalence and the associated pain? We may sometimes be able to free ourselves of it, as when a person ambivalent towards a step-parent as a child comes later in life to see the situation from the parent's point of view. Now an adult herself, perhaps with her own family, she's aware of the difficulties of being a parent, let alone a step-parent, and comes to sympathize with the people who brought her up. The ambivalence gives way to sympathy, appreciation, and love. Unfortunately, this is not always possible, but something else I believe is we can learn to accept our own ambivalence, and this I really like, without trying to deny either the positive or the negative feelings. I suspect that one of the main reasons emotional ambivalence can be so painful is that we try and fail to get rid of it. We attempt to persuade ourselves that we have either only positive or only negative feelings towards someone, but that's simply untrue, and we're proven wrong every time. Things may be easier if, like Walt Whitman, we embrace the idea that we contain multitudes and that others do too. So she quotes Walt Whitman, and I would like to read his poem. It's a great poem. I just want to bring everybody in. Good morning, Jay Abrams, and good morning to Lionel. Welcome. I was talking about Yisro, and I actually once heard something from Reb Arya Carmel Zatzal. Lawrence, did you know Rabbi Carmel from England? He was, of course, a Talmud of Dessler, and he made Aliyah early on to Beit Vegan. So
no, I don't know. It doesn't mean anything to me, no.
So I had the opportunity to hear a few shiurim from him. I was once in his home hearing a shiur, and he said a beautiful idea. He was talking about Eliezer Eved Avram, but the same thing is true of Yisro. He said, the Avos HaKadoshim and Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron HaKohen, they were, such great men, in a sense, supermen. And so we say, Chazal teaches to say, Masai Yagiu Masai Lemaisei Avosai. When will my deeds begin to reach the deeds of my forefathers? But the truth is, the answer is never, because they were really super great men, and they were really had, I think, unity of heart and unity of faith. I mean, of course, they were not perfect, they were imperfect, and we read about their foibles and their mistakes in the Parshios, but they were really, really great men. But the secondary characters who surround them are better fodder, in a sense, for us to learn about ourselves and how we can better ourselves. So Rabbi Carmel talked about Eliezer Eved Avraham, and the tension that he felt. On the one hand, he wanted to do his master's bidding. He was really faithful servant to Abraham, and Abraham told him to, bring a wife from Mesopotamia, but he really wanted his own daughter to marry Yitzchak, and so he was conflicted. And that, what do you do with when you're conflicted, is something that maybe you can't see that in Abraham or in Isaac. I mean, the truth is Abraham was conflicted about throwing Ishmael and Hagar out of the house, right? And Hashem told him sort of cut and dry, Shema b'kolah, listen to your wife. So that's a simple resolution. But dealing with conflicted emotion is something that we have to do. And Eliezer did it in his way. He created sort of a trick. He said, okay, the girl that brings me water and says, Gam le'gemalecha ashkeh, who I'll give also to your camels, she's the one. And it wasn't the most rational thing to do. It was sort of like a gamble, but he did that because he knew that he was conflicted. And he was afraid that if I use my own judgment, I'm going to passel. I'm going to say each one is not good enough for Isaac because I'm really driving towards my own daughter. And I'm trying to find that there's no one good enough for Isaac so that there'll be no one left except my daughter. So in order to take himself out of the equation, he created sort of a random function. Whichever girl comes out and offers water to the camels, she's the one. So that was how Eliezer did it. And I think here, I'm trying to teach sort of psychological and a midos and a musar lesson from Yitro. Again, it's painful to Yitro, and to me, it's sort of painful to me that Yitro suffered so much for the Egyptians. We have that, of course, the brotherhood of man, and that, we know that the angels, when they were going to say Shira, Kadosh Baruch Hu said, Ma'aseh Yodai, Toivim B'yam, V'atem Omrim Shira. So the loss of life of course, non-Jews, but here they were oppressors. They were oppressors of the Jewish people. But Yisro is still suffering. They're suffering. So he's divided. He's ambivalent. He is happy about the salvation of the Jews, but he is troubled. It makes his skin prickly, the suffering of the Egyptians. So again, Yisro is a character that we can learn from because he's conflicted and ambivalent. So let me share this poem from Walt Whitman, because I want to. And I think there's really great insight here. It's called Song of Myself, and it's short. The past and present wilt, I have filled them, emptied them, and proceed to fill my next fold of the future. Listener up there, what have you to confide to me? Look in my face while I snuff this sidle of evening. Talk honestly, no one else hears you, and I stay only a minute longer. Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. I concentrate toward them that are nigh. I wait on the door slab. Who has done his day's work? Who will soonest be through with his supper? Who wishes to walk with me? Will you speak before I am gone? Will you prove already too late? So again, that's Walt Whitman. It's a famous quote. Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. So Yisro contained multitudes, right? He contained a sympathy and a love for the Jewish people, joy at their redemption, but he contained other multitudes that connected him. He had been an advisor to Paro, which means that he was committed to the advantage and the prosperity of the Egyptian civilization. So the fact that, Paro and the Egyptians had suffered was troubling to him, and he was conflicted over that. Okay, here comes Shimon. I want to share now a halacha from the Rambam in Hilchos Trumas. Today is Tu B'Shvat. Good morning, Reb Shimon. It is Tu B'Shvat, and it's the first Yohrtzeit of Mordechai Jacoby, Zichron Livracha. And so his family has generously donated or dedicated the day of learning in Koilel. And I decided I wanted to learn a specific halacha that it was a halacha that Mordechai knew and put into practice I knew the halacha, I had learned it in Gemara, but I was afraid ever to use it. And Mordechai had this, simple boldness that if he knew the halacha, he was going to do it. And so he did it. And so we're going to talk, I'm talking about clementinos, the little oranges that were growing on his tree, and the way he would take trumas and maasros from them. And we talked this week about needing a big spreadsheet. And this is the kind of thing where big data, from which oranges have you taken trumas and maasros, and from which oranges haven't you? To me, it would be really, really tricky. But Mordechai was bold and had a policy. And that's what I want to learn now. Nishmas, Mordechai, Yochanan, and Yehуда, David. So we're in the 5th parak of Hilchos Trumos. And it's there's a legal principle at stake here called, Einad makneh davar shelo ba la'olam. Generally, you can't make a kinyan on something which isn't here yet. We're going to talk about, can you marry a little girl that hasn't been born yet? So we're talking about that in terms of Hilchos Trumos. So the Rambam says the following: Ein tormin mina mechuber ala tlush, velo mina tlush ala mechubar. So part of the halachas of truma, of separating truma, we all know it's, although there's no official shiur, afilu chita achas poteres esakri, but you're supposed to take, a 50th, a 60th, or a 40th, depending how generous you are. But you're supposed to take from very similar fruits, not mina yafe ala ra, not mina ra ala yafe. And here we're talking about fruits that you've already picked versus fruits that are still on the tree. So you can't take truma mina mechubar, something that's still on the tree, for something that's already been picked. Nor can you say that the fruits that have been picked should be truma for the stuff that's still on the tree. Ketzad hayulo peiros tlushim. He has fruits that have been picked. Amar peiros elu yu truma al peiros elu amechubarim. The fruits that I picked should be truma for the fruits that are still on the tree, so that later when the fruits on the tree, when I pick them, I won't have to separate trumas and maasros. It'll have been done already. You can't do it. Now there's a little girsa problem in the Rambam. The Kesef Mishnah is going to work on it. It says here, afilu lכשיתלשו, even after they will have been picked. But that gets complicated, so I'm going to put it aside for right now. Another example of how you can't be mafresh truma from one on another. Osha hayulo shte arugos. You have two, I'll call them bushes. V'amar peros arugazu tlushim yu teruma al peros arugazu mechubarim. Again, the fruits from the one that have been picked should be truma on the one that haven't been picked. Osha amar peros arugazu mechubarim. You trumal peros arugazu tlushim. In all these cases, the halacha is lo amar klum. Garnished. It doesn't work. You can't take truma mina mechubar and not mina tlush ana mechubar. It just doesn't work.
Isn't this a davar she'osed lovoi?
It's a davar shelo ba la'olam, right?
But it's she'osed lovoi.
Oh, so Sam's saying that when it's avidi da'asu, right? When it's something that's going to come along, so then it should work. Okay, so really that is a very important point you're making, Sam. Let's clarify that if I'm trying to sell you Peros Dekel, okay, I'm trying to sell you the dates from my palm trees, so it's a davar shelo ba la'olam. But since every year my palms produce dates, so midi da'asu, at least Reb Meir holds, adam makneh davar shelo ba la'olam b'midi da'asu. Okay, so something that is definitely going to come along in the future, it's sort of not mechusar maisa. It's something that predictably will come along without any further intervention, so then it should work. Okay,
but what about the peros that are already on the tree, that they're still mechubar? It's bali olam. What that reasoning you employ.
That's exactly where we're going. That's where we're going. Okay, so you're at the right tree.
What's the difference between the first case and the second case?
Explain, Lawrence, what you mean first and
You said
second.
a general rule. You can't, thrown in the Mechubar.
Yes.
And he said also not if it's two different bushes. What one's Mechubar?
A really good question. The Kesef Mishnah asked that question. Why did he have to bring in that second thing? Like, what did he get from that? I can't answer that right now. Maybe the Kesef Mishnah will give us an answer. So meanwhile, we're holding by the question, why shouldn't this work if it's a vidi de asu, if it's something that's going to come along by itself? So basically, the answer is it does work. And again, that's what Mordechai would rely on when he would separate Trumas and Maasros on his Clementinos, the ones that he had picked for the ones that he has not yet picked, that are still on the tree, but they will become Truma, or they will be exempted from Truma, Lכשיtlשו, when they will have been picked. Okay, so let's see it in the Rambam.
But isn't that still a problem numerically? Because you don't know exactly.
That's why I said you need big data for this. You have to know which ones did, which ones didn't. I don't know how you could really manage it. I think it would be logistically difficult to maintain, a clarity in your mind. So I don't know.
It's like the fruit trees that I have. And sometimes you could look up at the tree. I have a rimon tree that many years it gives over 100 rimonim, but when you actually pick them, you see that some of them you can't use because the bugs got to them already or whatever. So those they're not going to be part of the minyan.
Yeah, fair, good point.
So
here it comes from the Rambam. Here's the halacha. The halacha is avalim amar peiros aruga zu telushim. Yiyu truma al peros aruga zu lכשיתלשו ונתלשו hoyel ubiyado litolshan eino mechuser maisa. He begins by saying but, right? The first case was lo amar klum, it did not work. But the seifa is, but if you say the fruits of this bush, which are tlushim, so these are ready to be meisered, and you say they're going to be truma and meiser, whatever, on the fruits that are still attached to the ground when they will be detached, and then they become detached later, subsequently, since it was within his capacity, this is a key word in Davar Shalom al Olam, the word biyado. He has the capacity. He could do it now. Since you could do it now, even though you did it prospectively, that it'll only take effect later, but you could have done it now. So hoyel ubiyado, to pick them, l'tolsham, it's considered einer mechusa maisa. That's a chiddush in the Gemara. Kol shebiyado einer mechusa maisa. Okay, that's a chiddush. And therefore, v'likכשיtלשו shnehem dvarav kayamim. So now when he picks the second ones, when he made the first ones truma for the second ones, and now the second ones have been detached, they're exempted. Okay, they were already covered by what he had set aside as truma from the ones he had already picked. So basically, he has some fruits in the basket, and he has some fruits on the tree, and he's taking trumas and maasros from the ones in the basket to exempt the ones on the tree when they will be picked. And then they ultimately do get picked. It worked. And dvarav kayamim. And he had separated truma from the tlush on the מחובר לכשיתלשו ונתלשו hoyelu biyado. It works. The last, before we ask on it, let me just give the last qualification. V'hu sheyaviu shteihan shlish be'et she'amar. It has to be, or it can only be, for fruits on the tree that have reached a certain stage of their growth. The Rambam defines it as shlish, a third of their growth. If they were, earlier than that, if they were just budding, so they're not extant at all, that would be mamish davar shelo bala oilam. But since they're ba'oilam, you could pick them right now. It's biyado l'tolsham, kol shebiyado eina mechuser maisa, and you said the tlush should be truma for the mechubar, lכשיתלשו ונתלשו dvarav kayamim. That was how Mordechai was mafresh trumas and maasros on his clementinos, and it's
Even though they're not ripe enough yet to eat, they only have to be a third.
yes, that is the halacha. That's the kind of thing the halacha decides for us. How early could you be mafresh trumas and maasros? So even though they're not sweet yet or they're not ripe yet, but they're heviu shlish, and that's called oinus and maasros for this purpose.
It's a strange thing. It's like somebody earns almost whatever to do it, whatever he earns. He's going to take. He says, I'm going to take 10% off for it's stuck or whatever. But he's got some accounts receivable that he hasn't that are due, but it hasn't gotten to his bank account yet. And it's like he's got 10,000 shekels, so he puts aside 1,000 and says, oh, this will count my 10% for the accounts receivable, and the accounts receivable, let's say, are another 20,000, and then those are exempt. I don't.
No, but Shimon, he put away 3,000, 1,000 for the 10,000 that he got, but another 2,000 for the 20 that he's gonna get.
So
That's
from
what
the first payroll that are to show, he's taking extra for what he thinks is going to be.
Yes.
We do it differently. I don't understand. We take Misa.
Good.
And what we do is we take a bunch of things off the tree, whatever they are. We have several fruit trees. And then we do Misa on those. Then we take another, whenever we come around and we decide we want to take more off, we take more off the tree. We do Misa on that.
Yeah,
I think that's okay. That's what we were told to do.
Okay, that's the way I would do it. That's the derech hamelech, okay? Because then you know exactly how much you have. It's straightforward. And it's true, you'll have to be mafresh, whenever you pick fruits, you have to make your haprashas, trumas, and maasros. But okay, it's not that big a deal. Mordechai's way is sophisticated. It's rocket science, because you have to keep track then which ones did I already separate on and which ones didn't. That'll be very hard to know. So again, it's a halach in the Rambam. I can't say it's not, but I don't think it's the best way to do it. I think Jay's way is the simple and straightforward way to do it. When you pick the fruits and they're tlushim and you have them, so then you should separate your trumas and maasros. That is the simple way. Good morning, Jay Pupko. Welcome.
Boker Tov.
Jay, do you have any trees up there in Chistin, or what's your situation?
We have some in our yard itself. We have olive trees and pomegranate trees.
Oh, nice. Okay, 2 out of 7 species you got.
Yeah. Plenty of citrus around in the neighborhood.
Very nice. So let's take a look at the Kesef Mishnah. It's long, I don't know if we'll see all of it, but it gives us some of the principles here. Ein tormi min המחובר על תלוש, Mishnah Perek Kama de Trumas. And this discussion and the complexity of it is in the 3rd Perek of Kiddushin. Kiddushin Perek HaOimer. Bo minei Reb Asi min Reb Yochanan, Peiros haruga zu tlushim, Yitru al Peiros haruga zu mechubarim. Peros haruga zu mechubarim Yitru al Peiros haruga zu tlushim, lכשיתלשו mahu. Okay, can you do that? So it's a shaila of the Amorayim. Amar lei kol shebiyado lav k'mechuser ma'aseh dami. Okay, so that's the halachic principle, that if you could do something, the potential to do it means that although actually you haven't done it, but that's not an impediment to the chalois of, in this case, the kriya shem truma. Tanya Kavase, we have a brisa like that. To Messiah Babe brisa, yeser al kain. Amar Rabbi ben Yaakov, afilu Amar Peiros haruga zu tlushin. Yitru al Peiros haruga zu mechubarim. Or Peiros haruga zu mechubarim, Yitru al Peiros haruga zu tlushim. I'm not sure about that. L'kashiyaviu shlish, v'yitleshu, ve'aviu shlish, v'nitleshu, dvarav kayamim. So this is Rabbi ben Yaakov saying yeser mikain. This is the halach we're talking about. Amar Rabba lo Amar Rabbi ben Yaakov ele b'shachas. He's only talking about like hay. like, grain that you're raising, you're not going to raise it to its full growth to be like, wheat and then flour. You're raising it to already cut it down early as animal fodder, as hay. Ele b'shachas. Aval ba'agam lo. And Rabbi Yosef Amar afilu ba'agam v'chulei. Kiman azla haditanya oimer lechaveiro. The Gemara goes into this halacha of davar shelo bala oilam. A person says to his buddy, Im yalda ishtecha nekeva. If your pregnant wife, we'll see if she's pregnant or not pregnant. How pregnant is she? If she has a baby girl, harehi mikudeshesli, then I'm going to marry your daughter. Maybe I'm going to marry your daughter for my son or whatever. Lo amar klum. The amar b'chanina lo shanu ela she'ein ishto muberet. That's if she's not pregnant. Aval ishto muberes dvarav kayamim. But if your friend's wife is already expecting, then you could be mekadesh his unborn daughter. So ikaraba shehukar ubera. According to Rabbah, it has to be not only that she's pregnant, but that she's showing. She's 3 months pregnant. And so everybody knows she's pregnant. So the baby is, although still a fetus, but to a certain degree extant. It's a living entity that we could therefore make a halachic chalois, a kiddushin through the father.
Because by Nisuim it says Achi Yirenu.
You're right, Sam, that in this case, you're not going to have a good judgment. You can look at the ultrasound, but that won't give you too much insight, I don't think. According to Rabbi Yosef, Afal Pisha lo hukar ubra. Ve'ikad amri amarabba lo amar belazman Yaakov el b'shachas be'kivshi aval b'shachas be'shakya lo. Rabbi Yosef amar afilu b'shachas be'shakya kaman azah had Tanya. Oimer lechaveru yalda ishtcha nekeva harei mekudeshesli lo amar klum. Amar b'chanina lo shanu el she'ein ishta muberes aval ishta muberes tvar b'kayamim. Kaman b'she hukar ubra v'divrei hakol. Amar Abai Rabbi Belazman Yaakov of Meir. Kulu svirluhu. Adam makne davar shelo bala oilam ad kan b'gemara. So we have, again, we've mentioned the Shita, Remeir, and now we're adding Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. And Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov is a key figure here. There's an expression about Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, shemishnaso kav v'naki. He doesn't comment on a lot of sugyas. He's not a very common Tana, but when he talks, we listen. His Mishnah is kav, meaning small, and naki, but it's fine flour. It's really well filtered. So when he talks, we listen. We usually paskin like Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Okay. So the passive Mishnah now goes through it. And he says, on the Indian halacha, Rabbeinu pasak beperek zayin mihilchas ishus. That's kiddushin. Kereb chanina. Debehukar ubra mekudeshet. If the man's wife is visibly pregnant, you could be mekadesh the fetus. Because of Aran shetamu mipnei shemifarish de'abayit esfirle the leisilchas Rabbi ben Yaakov lo palig bahadi Rabba Rabbi Yosef Bedina dekulu modu b'shachas de'bekivsha the davar shelo olam hu mahani b'truma ve'ishtamu beres nami b'shehukar ubra mekudeshes. Miu Rabba Rabbi Yosef, Tarchi leukmei milsad Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov v'shachas tahavi davar shelo bala olam ki hechi detekum aliba de hilkasa the kaimelan mishnas Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov kav v'naki. We like to paskin like him. Yes.
I still don't understand.
What? Because you haven't seen her?
Huh?
That your kash is because that you didn't achi re'ena?
Chosma achi yirenu, it has to be medato. Like we see over there, it says atelecha ish. She said eilech. Mekan shedo si misho el medato. But this is not the child has no das. So how can be kedushin teifus?
Good question. So the answer is that ha'av mekadesh es bito kushihi naira. That there's a pasuk in the Torah as biti natati leish hazeh. It's in Parshas Motzi Shemra. And so there we see that while a girl is still a minor, her father has the das to be mekadosh her. And so what you're saying, Sam, you mentioned Achirena, and there's another halacha in the same vein, which is Kishehi naira in Kishiktana lo. It's not good to marry your daughter off when she's a real small child, because you should wait until she has enough das, she's reached the age of 12, that she can say Beploini ani rotza, that she can look at the guy and decide, yes, I want to be married to this man. So you're right that lechatchila, you shouldn't marry a woman until you see her, and a father shouldn't marry his daughter off at such a young age that she has no discerning. But the letter of the law, the power, the capacity, the legal capacity is such that a father can marry off his minor daughter, not only from the day she's born, but we're learning here even before the day she's born. And where is the das kiddushin? You're right that every kinyan needs das. You need two parties. Takes two to tango. So you need the das koine. The husband is acquiring, but who is, in a sense, selling? Who's giving the girl over for marriage? And the answer is her father. And where did he get that right? And the answer is the Torah. The Torah says it's biti natati leisha zeh. A father has the capacity to marry off his minor daughter, even when she's in an unborn state. And again, that's a unique power. The Torah only gave it to a father. We all know, we've learned many times that if there's no father, that the daughter is, let's say, a Yisoima, nobody can marry her against her will. And even if her mother and brother and, you know, her aunts and uncles and all the good people, her grandparents, whatever, are trying to take care of her, they want to get her married off young so that a man will take care of her and feed her and clothe her and watch out for her, that nobody should take advantage of her. But if she says, you know, well, she's still, you know, a child, she's 10 or 11 or something, and she says, you know what, this guy is not for me, whether he's abusive or I just don't like him. So she can leave that marriage. That's called miyun. And kiddushay d'Rabbanan that were created by all the people seeking her good, but they weren't her father, then the kiddushin are not really toifsin d'Oraisa, and she doesn't need a get. She can just say, Zell, it's over. I don't want to be here. And she walks away. So you're right that, you know, it's a chiddush of the Torah that a father has the capacity to provide the das kinyan of his daughter for kiddushin while she's a minor. That is the law.
Can the husband walk away?
I don't think so, because he married her, he, you know, made this, you know, acquisition, as it were, and that's a hischayvus. So he would have to
give a get.
That's exactly right. And also because he's not a minor, right? We're not talking about he's a 12-year-old kid. He's a teenager, whatever he is, but he's a full adult in front of the law, and he has obligations towards his wife to feed her and clothe her. And if he now wants to absolve himself of those obligations, he will have to give her a get. And, you know, a nafkamina is if she ends the marriage b'miyun, she's still ksheira lekahuna because she's not a grusha. But if the husband gives her a get, then she has received a get, and then she could not marry a Kohen. So, you know, slight difference there. Okay. So, again, the Kesef Mishnah is going into the kishkas of how the Rambam paskin is halacha. And
I'm sorry, Robert, just
yes.
stepping back a second. If she's still a minor, still a Nara, and she does accept him, and there's Bia, is then it's too late, even though she's still a Nara, it's too late for her to do the meal?
Good question. Until when can she do miyun is essentially the question, right? And it's a machlokes tanoim, but I wanted to make a slight correction, Shimon, in the terminology. When a girl becomes a naira, she's actually a gedola. I mean, she's considered an adult in front of the law.
Okay, so I use the wrong word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do know what you mean. So
12.
Yeah, right. She becomes a naira at the age of 12, and then a bogeres at the age of 12 years and 6 months, right? There's 3 stages by a girl, a ktana, a naira, and a bogeret. Whereas a boy, it's just he's a katan and then he's a gadol. There's no in-between stage like that. So at what stage does she, basically, if they have relations after she's come of age, they're now officially married. And from there on in, he would have to give her a get. That's exactly right. Okay. I'm going weiter in the Kesef Mishnah. We're talking about this halacha that Adamakne davar shelo bala olam. Umishum hachi ukminin b'shita umiu kulu moidu d'shachas v'hukar ubra davar shelo bala olam mikri. So this halacha of separating trumas and maasros from the stuff you've picked based on the stuff that you haven't picked yet is based on the halacha of davar shelo bala olam, that under certain circumstances that works, like Sam said before, on midi da asu, on something that is going to come along. So the Kesef Mishnah asks, "Iklameda kalei de imkein lama pasakan shetzarich behaviu shlish beit she'amar afilu b'shachas de bekivsha mikri davar shelo bala olam l'vidvarav." The Viran nearly Shabbeinu Sovet Kivin Dukim the Kerbelas ben Yaakov B'Shita Le Silksa Kavase. In this case, we don't paskin like Kerbelas ben Yaakov Mishumachi Pasuk de Be'inyan Sheviu Shlish V'Hukar Ubra Filu LeRabbanan Mekudeshes Techashiv Bale Olam Kemo Hevia Shlish B'Tvuah. Okay, so the Kesef Mishnah is saying that maybe in this case it's not even considered a davar shelo bala olam, because once the fruits are on the tree and they've reached a third of their growth, so that's not called davar shelo bala olam. That's ba'olam. It's now ready to be meisered. It's true it hasn't been picked yet, but that's just sort of a technicality. You could pick it and it's ready. Again, it's not really ripe, but it's a third of its growth. It's reached oinus and maasros, so one could consider that ba'olam. Ba'afagav dehava efshar loimer dekiva the kaimelan mishras Rav Elazar ben Yaakov kaven naki v'gamin echazinin derabba Rav Yosef pligi alibei al masvir lekavasei v'gamin dehadar gemara leugmei the Rabbi Chanina kirabba Rav Yosef alibi Rav Elazar ben Yaakov mashma the svir gemara dehilchas lekavasei. It looks like the halacha is like Rav Elazar ben Yaakov here. Ba'afagav dekaimelan ein adam makne davar shelo bala olam hacha chashiv davar shebala olam kaven shehu shachas the Rabbi Agam Rav Yosef ba'afagav de'abaye pligi ve'amar dehai nami havi davar shelo bala olam havale yichida. Okay. Oh, yeah, this was what I wanted to mention, that the Kesef Mishnah dealt with the girsa in the Rambam. So let me share that with you. This just shows how the world of halacha is so interactive and evolving. Because here we have a printing of the Rambam, and there, the Kesef Mishnah is the very, very, very beginning of printing. He probably had manuscript versions of Rambam, because very, very beginning. The Kesef Mishnah was born in 1488, and he lived a long life into the mid-1500s. But I don't know if he ever saw a printed Rambam. I would think he had a manuscript Rambam. And what he says is v'yesh tosefes b'sifrei Rabbeinu shekatuv behem afilu amar lכשיתלשו v'to'u soiferhu. Right? That's these words up here where it said afilu amar lכשיתלשו. So he says there's a mistake here. There's an addition that's been put into the text, and it's a mistake. You got to erase it. And if you're hesitant to alter the girsa to that degree, that's sort of what they did. They put parentheses around the word Amar to take out the word Amar. Afilu lכשיתלשו eina truma kaven shu lo amar lכשיתלשו mikol makom yesh yitor lashon b'divrei Rabbeinu. The nakad hayulo peros telushin v'chulei v'nakad hayulo shtei arugois. This was Lawrence's question. Why did the Rambam have to go through the case first telushin mechubarim and then shtei arugois, one talush and one mechubar? What's that about? Tarti lamali. Okay, Lawrence's exact question. Ubesov nira sheyesh chisaron. V'nira shanuscha hanechoina b'divrei Rabbeinu. Kachi, Keitzad hayulo shtei arugois. Vamer peros arugazu tlushim yitru mal peros arugazu mechubarim. O she'amar peros arugazu mechubarim yitru mal peros arugazu telushim lo amar klum. Okay, basically it looks like the Kesef Mishnah is boiling down the Rambam into the essential girsa and removing extraneous clauses. Avalim amar peros harugazu tlushin yitru mal peros harugazu mechubarim lכשיתלשו. O she'amar peros harugazu mechubarim yitru moy al peros harugazu telushim lכשיתלשו v'nitleshu hoyel ubiyado letolshan eino mechuser maisa v'lכשיתלשו dvarav kayamim v'hu she'aviu shtein shlish. Okay, so that was sort of a bold Kesef Mishnah, rewriting the language of the Rambam in this halacha, but maintaining the basic idea that although truma is meant to be taken when the talush, lemaisa, it is possible to make an amira of a hafrashas truma, talush ala mechubar lכשיתלשו. As long as it's reached a certain stage of its growth, at the time you do it, it works. And like I said, then you need big data. You need to keep track which fruits have been included in your hafrasha. The easier way is to do what J. Abrams did, and that is when you pick it, separate from what you picked, and what's on the tree, you'll deal with it later when you pick it.
So what does the Yitleshu actually do that allows you to do this?
It can only, the fruits can only be exempted or become truma when they're tlushim, not when they're mechubarim.
Right.
So therefore, lכשיתלשו, that you have to say, make that stipulation when they will have been plucked. Okay, because Stam saying, the reish of this halacha, Jay, I'm not sure if you were here when we started the halacha. But the basic halacha is ein tormin min hamechubar ala talush, and if you did, lo amar klum. Okay, below min talush hamechubar, you just can't do it. It's not how. So that's why saying this word lכשיתלשו, I'm doing it now, and it'll take effect when they are detached, and then you detach them at an appropriate time later. That does work. Okay.
But it is. When we're saying it is davar shebal ha'olam, if there's a shlish and it's still on the tree.
Yes, that's how I see it. The Kesef Mishnah brought two different approaches on it. Either it's a davar shelo bala oilam, but we paskin that you can make a kinyan on davar shelo bala oilam when it's avidi de asu, like Sam said, something that's going to come along anyway, just sort of passively through time. Or it's possible to say, since we're talking about fruits that have already reached a third of their growth, they have a din of davar sheba oilam. It's like it's here already. It's just missing the act of detaching them. And since it's biyado, the Gemara said, Rabbi Yochanan said, "Kevin kol shebiyado lav mechuser ma'asidami." So that's not an impediment to making the chalois because you could pick them at any time.
I have one other question.
Yes, Lawrence.
Do I understand that even you can you can even actually use those that are still on the tree as the truma?
I was afraid you're going to ask that.
Because we had it both ways. Ein truma min hamechubar ala tlush, v'lo ala tlush ala mechubar.
Yes, I don't like it at all, but it does say that, right? He says that. He says that. Again, let's see that in slow motion. Osha Amar Peros Aruga Zu Mechubarim. You Truma al Peros Aruga Zu Tlushin. which is like eat today, pay tomorrow.
But
You know?
even the beginning of the Rambam, right at the beginning.
Yeah. Where? Ein tormi min
המחובר על התלוש.
etc. But that says you can't do it, so that's okay.
Well, you can't do it. You can't do it even. Why do we even need to say that? Surely, ein tormi min המחובר on anything.
Min mechubar even.
Yes.
Okay. You're right about that. Ein tormin b'mechubar, because you only are toirem when you pick it. It's a good point, but still, in the Reisha where it's saying this doesn't work, it's simpler. But in the Sefer, he's saying it does work, and so he says what he says. The Rambam knows what he's talking about, and he is making that claim that I picked a basket today, and I'm going to eat this basket, all of it, 100% of it. The truma for it is on the tree, and it will take effect on those specific fruits that are on the tree, which I'm designated b'machshava, I guess, and of course I'm saying it, and they will become truma lכשיתלשו. So again, I hate it. It makes me very uncomfortable. I'm just so scared. Like Shimon said, what if the birds eat them? What if the insects? What if a storm happens? I don't know, anything could happen. It just seems so risky to me. So I don't like it at all. I want you to pay first and eat later. So first separate trumas, from the tlush, and then maybe later you could eat from the mechubar. But the Rambam does include that case where he said, Peros arugazu mechubarim, you truma peros arugazu tlushin. And again, at first it's lomer klum, but if you say peros arugazu tlushin, you truma peros arugazu lכשיתלשו ונבלשו, hob yad l'shashim ene mechuzah meiser. 1 second, Lawrence, did he say it? Did he say it in the last case? Maybe not. In the last case that did work was the aval. Im amar peros arugazu tlushin, you trumal peros arugazu lכשיתלשו ונבלשו, hob yad l'shashim ene mechuzah meiser v'legyishu shneim dvarim kayamim. But he didn't say you could make the truma on the mechubar for the talush. What do you think, Lawrence?
Yeah, but I'm still surprised that he even brings forward the idea that you could possibly use mechubarim for Maisa.
Osha Amar Peros Arugazu mechubarim, you trumal Peros Arugazu tlushin. On that, he gives us lo amar klum. That totally.
He said lo amar klum. Yeah, but I mean, who would even think that if they are mechubarim, we have a general principle?
Okay, I hear you. But in the case that does work in the Seifa, he only gives us the possibility.
Okay, right.
Yes, so it looks like that the Rambam, it's only that, and like I said, pay first, eat later. First, separate the truma from what is talush. And it's going to take effect also on what is not yet talush, lכשיתלשו, and then later you pick them. Since you had the capacity to pick them, they're not considered mechusar.
What's shnehem?
Both the fruits that you picked and the fruits on the tree. Because let's say you picked the fruits too early, before they reached a third of their growth. And so you tried to make them truma, but that didn't work because they haven't reached the stage yet that they're chayav.
The previous bit.
Yes, because until they're actually off the tree,
Right.
it didn't work. Again, this is the halacha, and this is the sugya, and it's the kind of thing that I don't think you should do. I would say it's halacha vein moirin kain, but Mordechai believed in it, and he had, amunas chachamim, and this was how I know that he did a lot of his trumas and maestros of his clementinos, and Baruch Hashem, they were sweet and juicy.
I think the Rambam would be if he was around today, he'd be investing in agricultural futures. He doesn't seem to worry about the speculative nature, to some extent, anyway.
Right.
Yeah. Regarding that, do we have like a shiur in terms of the probability on Avididiasu? I mean, if it's 51% probable, is that all you need?
No, I don't think that. I think it's, the examples we have are basically growth of crops, There's a Gemara in Bamitzia that talks about who says that this contingency will occur, and if that contingency, et cetera, et cetera. So I think Avidi de Asu is like trees give fruits, or wheat grows every year. So that's a very high certainty. I think much greater than 50%. So it's
Not,
the
maybe
general
not
course of
necessarily
nature.
on a particular fruit, right?
Yes.
Whether it's gonna, it's gonna grow to its mature size, like could be destroyed by insects, very common,
Sure.
or other pests.
Right. But the fact that a crop will be produced this year, that happens every year, just about. So according to the regular course of nature, that's what I would say is Avidasu. Okay. Okay. I'm glad with that we got to share this halacha. Le'ilui Nishmas Mordechai Yohnnan ben Yehuda Doved. I'm gonna put closure on the recording.